Can treating your pelvic floor symptoms change your life? More than you might even know. We'll hear a powerful story from a Hinge Health member on today's episode of Taking the Floor.
I felt like my body wasn't working for me anymore. It made me feel like I was aging faster and that I couldn't perform or participate in things I used to be able to. So it really felt like a decline.
Welcome to Taking the Floor, the podcast from Hinge Health about pelvic health, movement, and taking charge of your well-being.
We're your hosts, Kandis Daroski
and Bijal Toprani.
And we're both pelvic health physical therapists here at Hinge Health. Thanks for being here.
Today, we're going to share the journey of a Hinge Health member named Susan. Susan is a 52-year-old school nurse who has been in our pelvic health program for about 6 months. Her story is such an amazing testament to the power of pelvic floor therapy and what a major impact it can have on your quality of life and even your outlook on life.
The episodes of this podcast where we zero in on a member's story are less about teaching you pelvic floor 101 and more about letting our members take the floor. Get it? We love having them share their experiences. It's an amazing way to shed light on what people go through and learn when it comes to taking care of their pelvic health and their well-being overall. Okay, let's hear from Susan.
I think I might actually have a hereditary component to a little bit of urinary incontinence, although it really didn't affect my life too much until recent years. But even as a child, I would get nervous sometimes and pee my pants, maybe before a track meet or something like that. Not all the time, or even giggling. I might laugh so hard I would pee my pants. So I would have I had a little tendency, and I think my mother did also. But after having 3 children, it probably got a little bit worse to the point where I would always cross my legs when I was sneezing. But again, it didn't really affect my life. I was a runner and everything was going fine. I think it was just the recent years as I approached menopause or perimenopause that I started to have more trouble. And I started to find that I would leak when I was running. And it was a big surprise. I didn't even realize how much. At some point I would look down and I was completely wet. And so it started to interfere a little bit more with things I wanted to do. And I was running with my daughter and I couldn't run as far without having wet pants, or it started to affect other things too in more recent years. For instance, I started to do salsa dancing and sometimes would have trouble with that. I would have incontinence with that. Or I joined my work softball team, and that was probably maybe one of the worst experiences. I think it was something about the motion being very sudden and unpredictable, pivoting really quickly or sprinting. So it really became a big problem for me. I felt like it was interfering with a lot of things I wanted to do in my life.
Something that really pops out to me is Susan's mention of the menopause and the perimenopause. I think that's something that we often don't talk about as women as much, or we kind of notice as pelvic health PTs that sometimes that's a population that almost gets forgotten a little bit, unfortunately. So I wanted to call that out, and that it's really common to see an uptick in incontinence during menopause or during the transition to menopause because of the decrease in estrogen levels. So obviously hormones are playing a big factor for women throughout, many life stages, and this is one of those. So that estrogen level can actually cause a decrease in the thickness of the skin of the tissue, and can also make the tissue in your pelvic floor weak. That can actually happen all over your body, but especially in the pelvic floor.
Yeah, Bijal, that's such a great call out on the point around menopause, because I think it's really common for us to really think about pelvic floor issues really happening around that pregnancy and postpartum time frame, because it's such a kind of finite period. You're pregnant, you have the baby, and then you start having symptoms. So it's really easy to associate those symptoms with that part of life. But with menopause, it's a bit more strung out. It can last a longer period of time. And so it can be harder for people to really connect that these types of symptoms could be, really stemming from that period of life. And I definitely want to bring it back to what Susan shared when she was talking about how long she's really been experiencing symptoms, even going back to her childhood. And it's a great place to remember that pelvic health symptoms can be cumulative. And what I mean by that is that they can kind of build over time and worsen over time. And so really doing the work when symptoms first start is always going to be the best bet, because like any other muscle issue, the more you put it off, the worse it can become and the harder it can be to treat and resolve your symptoms.
Okay, up next, Susan also talked to us about how her symptoms started to affect her at work. We know how incredibly frustrating and disruptive these symptoms can be at work, even when we tend to make light of them.
I'm pretty open and I have a sense of humor about things. My job, fortunately, is not very physical. I'm more administrative, or a lot of the things I do are more administrative or supervising. But I do get in the classrooms, and sometimes I'm doing direct contact nursing or filling in for nurses who are absent. And in those situations, I actually would do a two-person lift of a student, because I work in special education. Some of my students are quadriplegic, in wheelchairs, needing toileting and things like that. So yeah, if I'm doing a two-person lift with an 80-pound child, I would notice that I would leak when I did that. And sometimes I would joke, oh, it's okay, I've got my reinforced granny underwear on today, or oops, I didn't wear the reinforced underwear today, it's going to be a problem. I just make light of it. But yeah, it would affect me at work as well.
Susan makes such a good point here about leaking with lifting. So, we often think about like people having these symptoms like at the gym, like our CrossFitters or people that are lifting weights. But even for Susan, her day-to-day job required her to lift, another human. And that's just another time where leaking can happen. And this can also happen with moms picking up their kids, or anytime you're really lifting a heavy object. And that really stems from a mismanagement of intra-abdominal pressure. So it's pressure that really builds inside of your abdomen, and it pushes down on your pelvic floor. And so there's some things that you can do to manage some of that, which your PT can really help you work through if leaking with lifting is something that affects you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I got to jump at the chance to give you just like a hot little tip right now about this, because I have seen even something as simple as this make such a big change in people's leakage, which is to just not hold your breath when you are performing those lifting activities. And so making sure to exhale, really blowing out as you're doing the lifting task can sometimes really make a huge difference. And it seems so small, but what it does is it really it encourages your pelvic floor to contract, and it gets rid of some of that pressure that you were mentioning, Bijal, that kind of builds up in the abdomen. So give that tip a little try if you do experience leakage when lifting, and see if it makes as big of a difference as it does for some people. One of the things that we heard from Susan was that she would sometimes like make jokes or make light of the situation, and she kind of references her reinforced granny panties, but at the same time she's also sharing that it was really impacting her life and that she really was seeing the effects of those symptoms. And sometimes it's hard to stop and think about how these supposedly no big deal symptoms like leaking really do affect us emotionally, mentally, and socially. But when you're really starting to unpack that, they do. And we shared some of Susan's thoughts on this in our first episode of the podcast, when we really talked about, minimizing your symptoms and just trying to normalize how common some of these conditions are. But we'll hear a little bit more from her now.
I felt like my body wasn't working for me anymore. It made me feel like I was aging faster, and that I couldn't perform or participate in things I used to be able to. So it really felt like a decline, kind of a decline in my health, and definitely affected my self-esteem a little bit too. I mean, I'm an optimist, and I would say I would try to make the most of things, but I was discouraged for sure. It affected my image, but it also affected my ability to pursue things where I might have been able to deepen friendships. Like I remember one time being really excited. I had moved to California about maybe 5.5 years ago, and it's hard to make friends as an adult, I think. And I had arranged to go for a run with a friend from my book club, and I was really excited because she lived pretty close to my house, and I thought, oh, this could be something that we could do together and get to know each other better. And I ran to meet her to start the run at her house, which was not far, maybe less than a mile away. And I already had saturated my pants, and I was completely uncomfortable. I didn't have anything, to catch extra urine, and so we didn't run again. It was the only time. And that was embarrassing for me too. I didn't share that with her.
What Susan just hit on, really shows the connection between good pelvic health and how good pelvic health really allows you to do activities that you love. And when you can't do the things that you love, it can really have a cascading effect on your own emotions, right? She was even questioning her own optimism. She's like, I used to be an optimist, or I am an optimist. And then obviously huge impacts on her social life as well.
Hopefully what you all can take from Susan's story so far is that she really loved social connection. She was like playing on a work baseball team. She was doing salsa dancing. She enjoyed running. And so thinking about the impacts that this made on her social life really gives you a strong indication of how isolating this kind of can be for people and start to feel like. And when you're not feeling good emotionally, your body is not feeling good either, usually, right? And your body is not going to be able to really get on board with like, let's change things. Let's get stronger. It's just that mind-body connection is so big. And so definitely can hear some of this coming out in Susan's story.
Absolutely. But Kandis and I are optimists too. So now we're going to transition to how do you go from experiencing these symptoms to actually treating them? We know for some people it can take a really long time to seek treatment or find the right treatment. There can be lots of stops and starts along the way. Before Susan started Hinge Health, she actually did some other pelvic floor physical therapy.
After I had my third child, I decided, okay, maybe I'm finished with having babies and maybe I can fix this a little bit. And that experience was positive, but I didn't feel like it really healed me. And it was, putting a sensor in your vagina and squeezing, and it was a lot more of, I guess that's a feedback mechanism, so you can kind of see in numbers what you're doing with your body. But I found that was more invasive and embarrassing, and I probably wouldn't want to continue that on an ongoing basis. I was willing to do it as an intervention after childbirth. But I actually didn't have complete success. I did learn some things in that experience, but it didn't give me the results that I had when I started this Hinge Health app.
Yeah, so sort of the elephant in the room. We're both PTs. And Susan just, shared with us that like maybe that didn't really work for her. And sometimes I think we don't do a great job of stepping back and realizing that, hey, different strategies work for different people. And that is a really important piece of your success and trying to tackle these issues. And I have heard this really often from people that maybe they've tried therapy in the past, it didn't work for them. But I think it's a true testament to why it is so important to find a physical therapist in a program that you feel comfortable and most importantly, confident about. Because when you're feeling comfortable and you're feeling confident, you can make those changes. But if you're not feeling that way, it's okay to say, hey, I need to explore some other options. I need to find things that are working really good for me. And the resilience that she showed, right? Like she's back at it again. It didn't work great for her first, but she didn't give up. And I think that's the most important takeaway here.
Yeah, and Susan also mentioned this biofeedback device that she used when she went through physical therapy. So I wanted to take a second to kind of describe maybe what Susan experienced in the clinic versus the pelvic trainer that we have in our program. So a biofeedback device is something that Susan used in the clinic where the PT, her pelvic health PT, was probably standing by, in the room while she was using the device and using the data that was coming from her performance to kind of help Susan contract her pelvic floor better or relax it. And so you can see that wasn't necessarily something that Susan could do in private, in her own time. With the pelvic trainer that we have, you might feel more comfortable using this device because you do it at your own time in the privacy of your own home and only if you feel comfortable using the device. So it does provide that biofeedback the same way that she was getting in the clinic, but it obviously has a little bit more of a privacy aspect to it. And it's a really reimagined experience of getting biofeedback for your pelvic floor, but from home versus in the clinic environment. And I think this is super important because we always want to give people the power of choice. We want them to know that if a pelvic trainer is not for you, if you don't feel comfortable inserting a device, then that's okay. There are plenty of other pelvic health exercises that you can do. But if you feel comfortable with it, your pelvic health PT will always hold your hand and make sure that all the questions you have are answered before you start using our pelvic training device.
And something that seemed like was maybe like a gap in what she experienced previously was this huge fundamental piece that we often don't talk about enough when it comes to pelvic health, and that is learning about these types of conditions. So we PTs spend a ton of time simply just educating our members so that they are more informed and empowered, and we love when this type of education resonates.
Well, I learned a lot of exercises. I love that it kind of just sets you up and it structures everything for you, and it doesn't take very long. So I'm learning different exercises and stretches all the time. But I really enjoyed the education portion. At the end of every session, it would sort of have some kind of article that you could read, and they were short but really informative. And I feel like I learned a lot from the articles as well.
This is something we get so much feedback from our members about, and it's the value that they get from reading our articles, and it just always gets me so fired up because I think that education is one of the most, if not the most, important piece to getting better. And something that I really love about my job and my role here at Hinge Health is that I get to work with an amazing team of people who helps put these articles together for our members. And so much thought goes into each and every one of them. So if even just one person reads something that we provide and it changes their perspective, or they feel more informed or more empowered, it's a total win.
Yeah, and not to mention that it's really hard to cover everything that we want to teach you in a single physical therapy visit. And that's where that education comes in. It really lets you learn and lean into a lot of the content about topics that are super important for your recovery, like the impact of stress on your pelvic floor and sleep and diet and bathroom habits, without having to necessarily be face-to-face with that PT. So it just really allows you to maximize on all your learnings, which is awesome because we're always prioritizing as pelvic health PTs. What are we going to teach next? How are we going to get all of this amazing information to our patients to really move the needle in their care? Now, before we wrap up Susan's story, let's hear her talk about how she's doing with her running now that she's been doing our program for a few months.
So I went from being able to really not run much at all to running 5 miles if I want. And I ran a road race, or it was actually a trail race, and I came in second place of all the women in the race. And it was a small race, but maybe 60 people. But yeah, I was one of the fastest women running the race. And so that was completely beyond anything I expected. I mean, I went from wearing reinforced underwear or some kind of a pad to, I can wear no underwear. So it's great. Yeah, I've really had a dramatic decrease in my symptoms. I'm really, really happy about it. I also had scheduled a surgery because I was so fed up with everything. So I started the app and I had an appointment with the urogynecologist, and I was just so fed up with the way that incontinence was affecting my life that I just said, let's just schedule the surgery. And I was going to do a mid-urethral sling. And as I got closer to that date, I just thought, I don't know if I really need this surgery. And so I ended up canceling it. I was a little scared because I was like, oh, well, what if the symptoms come back? But I just couldn't justify taking a risk of surgery when I really didn't have a big problem anymore.
I mean, Susan's results are absolutely phenomenal. And I also want to mention, side note, that I love her laugh. It is just like so joyful. But everyone's results are different. They happen at different times. These results are so great, and they can give you hope that even if things are taking a little bit longer, it's really worth sticking to it.
Right. And she also mentioned surgery. And I just wanted to call out that surgery actually is needed for some people. Everyone's story and journey is different, but it's always great to try conservative options first. And got to get on my PT soapbox here. Even if you have surgery, physical therapy and pelvic floor rehab is still appropriate and a really important part of that process for you. So learning how to engage these muscles before that surgery, rehabbing after is just going to set you up to be so much more successful.
Okay, so for all the members we spoke with for this podcast, we made sure to ask everyone 2 questions, and I think the answers are amazing and really telling and helpful for others to hear. The first one was, what do you wish you knew before starting this program?
I wish I might have known how much of a difference it would make. I don't know. This has been a complete surprise to me that it's exceeded my expectations of the results I would have. So I think I may have tried to engage all those muscles earlier if I had known that it was going to work. I think because I had tried the physical therapy before and it wasn't so life-changing, I didn't have a lot of faith that it was going to work for me. So, just a belief that that physical therapy can really change your life and really improve your symptoms.
We also asked, what would you say to someone who's not sure about getting care for their pelvic health?
I think especially for perimenopause, a lot of women withdraw I've even met, like I went on a run with a group, and I met a woman. She'd had an injury, so she was out of running for a while. Perimenopause hit, so on top of the injury, she was having some incontinence, and so all of those things made her feel like she wasn't able to run like she used to. And I did tell her, don't give up. It can get better, and I do think we should talk about it because it does feel like a lonely experience. So you're not alone, and there's hope, and things might not be exactly the same, but we can do a lot to make ourselves feel better.
Chilly willies. It doesn't matter how many times I hear things like that. So basically what I'm saying is I'm ready to start the Susan fan club and be the president if anybody wants to join me, because this is just such a transformative story of a person who began to feel really limited in their everyday life by her symptoms. But she really persevered and she had an open mindset. And I think that part is key. She was really willing to dig in, to try. And for her, this was her second time doing PT, but she was still open to trying it in a different way. And with that perseverance, she found so much success. So if you are listening and you can see some of yourself in Susan's story, don't give up. Have an open mind, and know that you don't have to do this alone.
Let's go over the 3 most important things to remember from this episode. First, Susan's pelvic floor issues touched so many parts of her life, from doing what she needed to do at work to the fun activities she wanted to do outside of work, like playing sports and dancing. Pelvic floor symptoms are a big deal, even though we often laugh them off.
Second, Susan started seeing relief after doing her exercises and reading educational articles. The more you know about your pelvic floor, the better equipped you are to take action and see improvement.
Finally, Susan called out how life-changing it's been to improve her symptoms. That's really not an overstatement. So many of our members tell us this.
For Susan, taking care of her pelvic health was a non-negotiable part of taking care of her overall well-being. And that is exactly how we look at it too. Let's just do a quick check-in on how else we're taking care of ourselves this week. What is your non-negotiable right now, Bijal?
So I finally went to my physical, my annual wellness visit or whatever the other day. I was off by a few months, but I'm still proud of myself for going. So prioritize that. And we actually talked about the difference between moderate and vigorous exercise. And it was very eye-opening because even as a PT, I feel like I kind of am on top of fitness. I know what it takes, but it was really good to have a reminder of how much exercise you need to stay healthy. So that was my non-negotiable, was making sure I made it to my annual physical.
Well, congratulations. I know those more preventative things can be super easy to just throw to the wayside. Mine, so for me, I think I'm really focusing on having the tough conversations that I think I need to have with people in life, and not serious ones, but I think sometimes we kind of put off the little conversations around the tiny things that people do that maybe bother you a little bit, or where you feel a little not supported. And so just, sitting down, having good chats with people, just really conversational, making sure that I'm not just brushing those off, but bringing them to light and really putting in some things into perspective and change based off of those.
That's really awesome. Some internal empowerment, prioritizing what your needs are. I am very proud of you for doing that. Thank you so much for listening. If you're feeling inspired by Susan, now could be a great time to jump into your playlist and do your exercises for the day. It doesn't take long, and every session is an important step on your journey. Remember, if you're dealing with pelvic floor issues, you're not alone, and we are here for you. The information contained in this podcast is intended to be used for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice or treatment for any specific condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider with any questions you may have about your medical condition or treatment. Check out our Hinge Health app library for new episodes coming soon.